heavy doors of the Oval Office closed with a muted thud, sealing the president inside the room's dim hush. Morning light bled through the bullet-resistant windows in pale streaks, illuminating stacked folders, sealed envelopes, and an untouched mug of coffee gone lukewarm hours ago. For a long moment, the president said nothing. He stared at the single folder lying at the center of the desk. Dark leather, unmarked, its edges creased as if someone had gripped it too tightly. Across from him stood the chief of staff, posture rigid, tablet in hand. 2 Secret Service agents lingered in the hall beyond the doorway, silent outlines in the glass. "Tell me again," the president said finally. His voice was low and hoarse. "Where did this come from?" The chief of staff hesitated. A rarity. "The files appeared on 3 independent servers last night. Anonymous drop. All labeled the same way. Archive, Mr. E. No signatures, no metadata. Whoever did it scrubbed everything. Everything except the content," the president said. The chief of staff nodded. 33,000 pages, hundreds of flight logs, financial transfers, testimonies, communications, and references to senior officials dating back 2 decades. The networks are already hinting at high-level involvement. The president's jaw tightened. He opened the folder. Inside lay a single printed sheet, just the first of thousands, a flight manifest. Year, 15 years ago. A private aircraft. Passenger list of 4 names, only 3 redacted. The one left visible. The president, back when he was still a businessman. "This doesn't prove anything," he said after a moment. "It's a flight, a meeting, a donor. Nothing illegal." "Maybe not," the chief of staff said quietly. "But the public won't see it that way. And the former president's people..." He trailed off. The president shut the folder. "Speaking of him, have we heard from his office?" "Not officially. Unofficially." The chief of staff swiped the tablet. A message appeared, a brief note relayed through an intermediary, allegedly from the former secretary, written hours after the leak began circulating. "This ends one of you, maybe both." The president exhaled sharply. "So they knew before we did. Or they're bluffing. Neither option comforts me," the president muttered. He stood and paced toward the window facing the south lawn. Protesters were already gathering beyond the gates. Not many yet, maybe 100, but they carried signs and news vans were circling like birds sensing blood. "How long until the networks go all in?" the president asked. "They already are. Commentators are calling it the largest political archive leak in a generation. Reporters claim the files reference over 300 individuals tied to Mr. E's network." 300, the president echoed. "And how many are sitting in Congress right now?" The chief of staff didn't answer. The president turned back, eyes narrowing. "Set up a meeting with the former president, face to face." The chief of staff swallowed. "Sir, with respect, both of you being in the same room right now, weeks of this will destroy us. The country's already on edge, and the committees will weaponize every line no matter what we say. It's still a risk. Everything is a risk." The chief of staff nodded reluctantly and stepped out to make the arrangements. Left alone, the president sank back into the chair. He opened the folder again, flipped to the next page. A wire transfer. 7 figures. Origin, a foundation linked to Mr. E. Recipient, a company aligned with the president's early ventures. He rubbed his forehead. "This is going to consume everything," he murmured. "Weeks, maybe months." His desk phone buzzed. He stared at it before answering. A familiar voice spoke, measured, cold, unmistakable. The former president, the caller ID read only in his mind. "We need to talk," the voice said. "In person, and soon." The president exhaled. "I was just about to send word. No staff," the voice directed. "Just us, and we talk before the committees drag us into a circus." A pause stretched. "You saw the files?" the president asked. "I saw enough, and I know what's buried in the rest. This could destroy both of us." "Not could," the voice said. "Will." The line went dead. For a full minute, the president sat frozen, the weight of the coming weeks pressing on his chest like a physical burden. A soft knock broke the silence. "The meeting is set," the chief of staff said from the doorway. "Tomorrow. Private location." The president nodded. Sir? The chief of staff added carefully. There's something else? The intelligence director flagged a detail in the first batch. The leak. It didn't come from outside. What are you saying? The chief of staff lowered his voice. It looks internal. The president's pulse spiked. Inside the administration? Inside government, definitely. But possibly... He hesitated. Inside this building. The president's expression hardened. Then we start digging, he said. Every office, every server, every staff member. Outside, thunder rolled over Washington. Inside, the first chapter of the political crisis had begun. The safe house chosen for the meeting was not on any official schedule, not marked in any internal logs, and not listed in any agency rotation. It sat on the edge of the Potomac, an inconspicuous federal property that had hosted classified negotiations for decades. Just after nightfall, a black SUV rolled silently to the rear entrance. The president stepped out first, collar turned up against the cold wind. The place smelled of damp stone and old wood, an atmosphere suited to secrets. Inside, the security lights were dimmed. A single lamp illuminated the long wooden table where the former president already sat, hands folded, expression unreadable. The former secretary stood near the window, arms crossed, eyes locked on the river's dark current. Let's get this over with, the president said. The former president raised an eyebrow. This isn't a press conference. Sit. The president sat across from him, the three forming a triangle of tension. The room seemed too small for the weight of what they carried. The former secretary broke the silence. The archive is worse than either of you thinks. Define worse, the president said. She slid a thin folder across the table. It was filled with summaries pulled from the first 5,000 pages of the leak. Only a fraction of the total, but enough to make any official sweat. Mr. E kept records of everything, she continued. Flights, transfers, guests, meetings, communications. And the leak reveals that his network didn't dissolve when he was gone. It was absorbed, redirected, into politics, into business, into influence. The former president tapped the table. There are dozens of people implicated. Officials, donors, lawmakers, foreign contacts. If this spiral continues, every branch of government becomes suspect. The president leaned back. And that's why you called for this? That's why we need a united front, the former president said. If we tear each other apart, the committees will bury us, and the country along with us. The president laughed dryly. A united front. Between us. That's rich. This isn't a negotiation, the former president said sharply. This is self-preservation. The former secretary added, and national preservation. The intelligence director briefed me yesterday. There's evidence the leak didn't come from outside. It was delivered, planted, coordinated. By who? The president asked. The former secretary exchanged a look with the former president before answering. By someone who wants every one of us removed. The president narrowed his eyes. Who? The former president replied, the oversight bloc. The president stiffened. The oversight bloc was a coalition inside Congress. Small, aggressive, bipartisan in appearance, but driven by their own internal agenda. They had been pushing for systemic purges, structural upheavals, and a complete rewrite of institutional power. So they're behind the leak, the president said slowly. They're using it, the former secretary corrected. They didn't create it. The archive existed. Mr. E's network existed. But someone made sure the files were delivered in the most explosive way possible. The president braced his hands on the table. Then what do you propose? The former president considered him for a moment. We need time. Time? The president echoed. The country is already boiling. Every committee is sharpening knives. Every network is digging for angles. We use the next week to get ahead of the narrative, the former secretary said. Not to hide anything, there's no point, but to frame it, contextualize it, show where the truth ends and insinuations begin. And after that? The president asked. The former president exhaled. We turn over every file ourselves, on our terms, voluntarily, before the committee subpoena us. The president shook his head. Voluntary disclosure? That's suicide. It's survival, the former secretary said. If we look like we're hiding, they'll assume the worst. But if we move first, if we release our own records, our own timelines, we control the ground. Control? The president snapped. We don't control anything right now. No, the former president agreed quietly, but we can influence the fallout. The president stood abruptly and walked toward the far wall, where an old framed map of the Capitol hung. His reflection stared back at him in the glass. You two think this buys us protection? He asked. No, the former secretary said. It buys us time, enough to identify the true source behind the leak. And once we find them? The president asked. Then we expose them, the former president said, before they expose all of us. The president turned back. There's something you're not telling me. A heavy silence answered him. The former secretary finally spoke. Some of Mr. E's files reference private meetings between your administration and foreign intermediaries, meetings that were never logged. The president's expression tightened. Those were preliminary contacts. Exploratory. Harmless. Not anymore, the former president said. They look like clandestine coordination now, especially when paired with the financial records. The president returned to the table slowly. So we're all compromised. The former president nodded. In different ways, yes. The president sat down again, the weight of inevitability settling over him. Fine, he said quietly. We coordinate. 1 week. After that, no alliances. I fight alone. The former secretary didn't blink. 1 week is all we need. A vibration interrupted them. 3 phones buzzing simultaneously. The chief of staff's message to the president. New releases uploaded. 10,000 additional pages. Some reference a classified operation from 12 years ago. The former president's aide. Committee schedules emergency hearing. You are both requested. The former secretary's advisor. Media acquired partial logs from the island. They air in 1 hour. All 3 looked at one another. The former president stood. Week 2 has begun. The president swallowed hard. And the country isn't ready for week 3. The 3rd week began with sirens. Not loud, not dramatic. Just the muted wail of government. Vehicles gliding across the Capitol grounds before dawn, carrying investigators, analysts, technicians, and a growing army of legal staff. Washington had settled into a strange rhythm, the country waking each day to new fragments from the Mr. E archive, agencies scrambling to keep pace, and political factions maneuvering for advantage like chess players holding knives under the table. Inside the West Wing, the president entered the Situation Room with noticeably darker eyes. Sleep had become a rare commodity. Meetings ran past midnight, briefings began before sunrise, and every hour delivered a new blow. 6 advisors waited for him. The Chief of Staff, the National Security Council, the Communications Director, the Legal Advisor, the Intelligence Director, and the Deputy Counsel. Papers were spread across the table like battlefield maps. The Intelligence Director began without preamble. We've confirmed the new batch is authentic. 10,000 pages. Most focus on financial structures connected to Mr. E's associates. Associates? The president asked. Where? Shell companies, charities, advisory groups, domestic and foreign. More than 60 entities. And how many touch my administration? 2, the director said. Minor on the surface. But the narrative potential is catastrophic, the communications director finished. The networks already have anchors drawing lines between the transfers and your early political fundraising. They're drawing lines even where none exist, the president muttered. That's the problem, the legal advisor said. Right now, the details don't matter. Optics do. Before anyone could respond, the chief of staff slid a folder forward. The former president's office released a statement this morning. The president opened it, scanning quickly. The statement was restrained, calm, almost lawyerly. It confirmed that the former president had met Mr. E occasionally, acknowledged several interactions of a professional nature, and welcomed full transparency for the sake of institutional stability. No defensiveness, no panic. A perfect contrast to the president's cornered posture. They're positioning, the president said, trying to look clean. The communications director replied, they're trying to look in control, and right now, they are. The president's jaw clenched. He set down the folder. Where do we stand with voluntary disclosure? The legal advisor hesitated. We prepared the document packet for release, but what? The committees announced this morning that any voluntary disclosure will be interpreted as tacit admission of wrongdoing. They want to trap us, the president said. They want to weaken you, the chief of staff corrected. And the former president. Together, if possible. The room fell silent. Then the president asked, "Updates on the internal leak?" The intelligence director responded slowly. "We have narrowed it down. Communications patterns, access logs, clearance levels. We believe the breach originated from someone with proximity to senior administrative staff." "Meaning what?" the president asked coldly. "Meaning someone with direct access to classified internal reports, possibly someone who attended high-level briefings, possibly someone you've interacted with daily." A chill ran across the room. The deputy counsel added, "We've identified 3 likely suspects, but accusing any of them without proof would create a second crisis," the chief of staff finished. The president looked around at the faces. "Continue quietly. No accusations? Not yet." A knock interrupted the meeting. A junior aide entered carrying a sealed envelope marked, "Urgent. Committee notice." The chief of staff opened it. His expression hardened. "They've moved the hearing up." "To when?" the president asked. 48 hours, and they want both you and the former president present." A ripple moved around the table. The president stood slowly. "So, this is the week they come for us." The National Security Council spoke carefully. "There's more, sir. The committees intend to question you about a specific section in the new batch." "Which section?" The council slid forward a printed excerpt, a list of meetings, locations, dates, and one cryptic description. "Private session with intermediary at Lakeside Compound, requested by executive official." "Purpose?" "Influence alignment." The president felt a pulse behind his eyes. That was preliminary diplomacy, nothing illegal. "But with Mr. E's financial ties in the background," the council said, "they will argue influence, pressure, leverage." The president exhaled sharply. "So they think I arranged something with Mr. E through intermediaries?" The legal advisor nodded. "It's speculation, but in hearings, speculation becomes spectacle." The president turned away, staring at the monitors lining the wall. One was showing breaking coverage, protest numbers rising steadily outside federal buildings, commentators arguing about accountability, and graphics of complex financial webs drawn across screens. Then the communications director's tablet buzzed. A message. "Urgent." She glanced down and froze. The chief of staff noticed. "What is it?" She slowly turned her screen. A new article headline glared back. "Exclusive. Partial logs from the island name and unidentified senior official. Public demands answers." The president's stomach dropped. The chief of staff whispered, "That has to be you." "No." The president's voice was steady but tight. "That island log entry could be anyone." The director replied gently, "Sir, you're the only one whose redactions are consistent with that timeline." Before the president could respond, the overhead monitor switched to a new broadcast. A breaking news anchor announced, "Leaked communications suggest the former president's circle anticipated the archive months before its release." The room collectively inhaled. The chief of staff muttered, "They're turning you and him against each other." "They're turning everyone against everyone," the president said. "Keeps us from uniting." "Sir," the intelligence director said quietly, "we need to address something difficult." "Say it." "The former president may not maintain the alliance you agreed upon." "What makes you think he'll break?" The intelligence director hesitated. "Because he gains more by letting you fall first." The words landed like a blow. The president didn't answer. He simply closed his eyes for a moment, just long enough to acknowledge the weight, then opened them again, colder and more focused. "Prepare counterbriefs for the hearing," he ordered. "Every file, every timeline, every log we can contextualize." The communications director nodded. "And the message to the public?" The president replied without blinking. "We tell the truth." The chief of staff frowned. "The truth?" "Yes," the president said. "If we hide nothing, they lose the narrative. This isn't about convincing them I'm clean. It's about proving I won't run." A quiet respect settled over the table. The president straightened his jacket. Week 3 isn't about survival. He looked at each advisor in turn. It's about positioning. The morning of the hearing arrived gray and cold, the kind of weather that made Washington look like a city carved from concrete and caution. The Capitol dome emerged through a haze as government vehicles crawled up the hill in single-file procession. Cameras formed a gauntlet at every entrance. Security cordons ran thicker than Inauguration Week. Inside the private corridor leading to the committee chamber, the president walked with his legal team and the chief of staff. He kept his expression unreadable, but tension clung to him like static. Ahead of him, the former president's entourage was already arriving, moving in a practiced, almost choreographed formation. The president watched them with a sense of déjà vu. Once, years ago, he had admired the former president's political instincts. Today, those instincts were a threat. The chief of staff leaned toward him. They'll try to get you to contradict him. If they split your accounts, they'll claim one of you is lying. They want a fracture? The president replied softly. His legal advisor added, and they'll press hard on the island logs. They're calling it the unidentified senior official narrative. The president exhaled through his nose. Let them. The chamber doors opened. The committee chair, a severe figure known for her calm ruthlessness, called the hearing to order. Rows of members filled the dais. Some eager, some wary, all politically hungry. 2 seats sat ready before the microphones. One for the former president, one for the president. They took their places under the glare of 100 lights. Cameras clicked like distant gunfire. The former president spoke first during opening statements, with the measured cadence of someone who had spent decades shaping public perception. I believe in transparency, he began. The archive concerning Mr. E is extensive, complex, and deeply troubling. I welcome this committee's effort to scrutinize every detail. While I interacted with Mr. E occasionally in a professional capacity years ago, I maintain that none of those interactions involved impropriety or influence. It was a clean statement, almost too clean. He was laying groundwork. The president followed. When the files leaked, he said, I ordered my staff to release every internal record relevant to my involvement. I did not hide. I did not delay. I believe the only way through this crisis is full exposure, not selective, not strategic. Full. The committee chair leaned forward. Then let's begin with your meeting 12 years ago. The Lakeside Compound, the intermediary. The president clasped his hands. It was diplomatic outreach. Informal, but not secret. A preliminary discussion with a foreign liaison. It had nothing to do with Mr. E. The chair raised an eyebrow. Yet the archive connects that intermediary to an entity linked to Mr. E. I was unaware of that connection. The president replied evenly. Convenient, a member muttered. The president didn't react. The former president shifted slightly in his seat, eyes narrowing with calculation. The chair turned to him. Your turn. Records show Mr. E contributed significant sums to advocacy groups aligned with your early initiatives. Yes, the former president replied calmly. Those contributions were unsolicited and routed through organizations I did not oversee directly. My public record on this is consistent. The president felt the air change. The former president was distancing himself, strategically, subtly. The chair resumed. Now, regarding the island logs, the files mention an unnamed senior official. Redactions block identification, but cross-referencing timelines narrows the possibilities. Reporters leaned forward as if pulled by gravity. The president spoke before they could pounce. I have reviewed my travel logs with my staff, he said. I was not present on that island, not once. The insinuation is baseless. The former president watched him with unreadable eyes. Then he spoke. To clarify, he said carefully, I also never visited the island. Any suggestion otherwise is misinformation. The room buzzed. The chair leaned in. We are not suggesting either of you visited. We are suggesting the redactions imply involvement or knowledge at higher levels. The president replied, Knowledge is not participation. Unless the lines blur, the chair countered. A committee member lifted a page. This portion, page 12,583, lists a series of meetings between Mr. E and various government-affiliated individuals. One entry is labeled Requested by Senior Executive Office. That could be interpreted. It could be interpreted 100 ways, the president cut in. Mr. E inserted himself into networks everywhere. Half of Washington received his requests. Requests are not proof of compliance. The former president added smoothly, "He had a talent for manufacturing proximity. I warned colleagues about that years ago." The president turned to look at him. The comment was small, but pointed. Subtle blame shifting. The alliance was dissolving. The committee chair noticed. She pounced. "So there were warnings," she said. "Warnings not publicly acknowledged?" The former president paused, then nodded. "Yes, in private discussions." "And the president?" She turned to him. "Did you receive such warnings?" "No." "Would you have acted differently if you had?" "Yes," the president answered firmly. The former president's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes tightened. The chair sat back. "I see the shape of this now. The two of you knew different pieces. One of you cautioned, one of you did not receive caution. Yet both of you appear in the periphery of Mr. E's network." She clasped her hands. "So either one of you is withholding information." A pause. "Or both of you have been compromised by the same source." The room erupted. Shouts, camera shutters, murmurs, reporters transmitting instant headlines. The president and the former president sat like statues, jaw set, tension vibrating like a wire between them. The chair slammed the gavel. "This hearing is not finished. We will reconvene in 72 hours with supplemental documentation from both of you." Before anyone could protest, she added, "And we expect complete cooperation." The hearing adjourned. As they left the chamber, the former president approached the president in the hallway where cameras couldn't hear. "You hung me out just now," he said quietly. "You fired first," the president replied. The former president leaned in. "This alliance is over." "It ended the moment you decided I'd fall faster than you," the president said. The former president's eyes hardened. "This isn't about falling, it's about who survives." And then he walked away. Behind them, reporters swarmed. And above them, on the Capitol screens, the next batch of leaked summaries began to scroll. The crisis had entered open warfare. The fifth week began with a silence so heavy it felt engineered. No press briefings, no committee leaks, no anonymous tips. The country held its breath. But those inside government knew the truth. The calm was not relief. It was compression. Pressure pulled inward, tightening, gathering force. And on a gray Thursday morning, it finally detonated. The president had slept in the West Wing for 3 nights straight, his cot set up in a secure office connected to the Situation Room. When the chief of staff stormed in before sunrise, he was still in a suit, tie loosened, reading over late-night intelligence summaries. "We found the source," the chief of staff said. The president set down the papers. "Who?" The chief of staff closed the door, locked it, lowered his voice. "A senior-level administrative officer, someone with clearance to internal communications and classified archives, someone present at every high-level briefing in the first 2 weeks." The president's pulse tightened. "Give me the name." The chief of staff shook his head. "That's the problem. The name is irrelevant." "What do you mean?" The chief of staff placed a tablet on the desk. On it, a message intercepted from a private channel. "Archive uploaded, Phase 2 deployed. Both will fall before week 6. The president felt the room tilt. "So, it wasn't personal?" "No," the chief of staff said. "It was structural." "Meaning?" "This wasn't about you, or the former president, or even the former secretary. It was about dismantling a generation of political power in one strike." The president leaned back slowly. "Then they succeeded." By mid-morning, the committees released a coordinated announcement. Final documents from the Mr. E archive will be made public today at 6 p.m. No further redactions. 6 hours, 30,000 pages not yet released. Unfiltered, uncontextualized, unforgiving. The president called an emergency meeting. The Situation Room filled quickly. Advisors, legal counsel, intelligence analysts, communication strategists. Every seat taken, every face drawn. The president began. "The former president is preparing his own broadcast. He'll try to go first, shape the narrative." The communications director nodded. He'll frame himself as a whistleblower victim, as someone who tried to speak up. "And me?" the president asked. The director lowered her voice. "He'll imply you ignored warnings." The president clenched his jaw. "Of course." The intelligence director interjected. "Sir, there's another concern. The newly leaked financial segments? The president held up a hand. I read them. Silence. They show patterns, he continued. Connections, but no illegal acts. That won't matter, the legal advisor said. Patterns create suspicion. Suspicion creates hearings. Hearings create casualties. The president rubbed his temples. And the island logs? The intelligence director swallowed. The redaction markers are consistent with a dozen officials across multiple administrations. You're not the only candidate for the unnamed role. Does the public know that? The president asked. No. Will the committees say it? No. The president exhaled sharply. Then they'll assume the worst. Sir, the chief of staff said gently, everyone looks guilty in a vacuum. At noon, screens across the Capitol flickered to life. The former president appeared behind a polished desk, eyes sorrowful, posture dignified, voice steady. A masterclass in controlled remorse. He spoke of regrettable associations, unwitting proximity, misleading appearances, and decades of public service overshadowed by a single archive taken out of context. Then he drew a careful distinction. I received warnings years ago about Mr. E's circle. I attempted to raise concerns, but others dismissed them. Everyone knew who he meant. The president watched from the West Wing, expression stone hard. The chief of staff muttered, "He's trying to survive by offering you up." The president nodded once. I know. 3 hours before the final release, the president stood at the podium in the East Room. No teleprompter, no prepared script, just a single sheet with bullet points. The room buzzed with reporters until he spoke the first line. I won't defend the indefensible, and I won't pretend to be perfect. Silence fell instantly. I won't hide behind redactions. I won't bury files. I won't claim amnesia. What matters now is not my past, nor any other official's past, but the structural vulnerability that allowed someone like Mr. E to weave through governments and institutions unchecked. Flashes lit the room. He continued. Parts of the archive reference me indirectly. Parts reference others directly. Some entries paint a distorted picture. Some reflect truth. Tonight you'll see everything. Because that's the only path left. He paused. Make no mistake, this will damage careers, mine included, but the point of power is not keeping it, it's using it to confront what everyone else is afraid to expose. It was the most unguarded speech of his administration. When he left the podium, some reporters looked shaken. At exactly 6 p.m., the servers unlocked. Within minutes, journalists, analysts, lawmakers, and millions of citizens were tearing through the documents. The full archive was brutal. Flight logs spanning 2 decades. Communications with powerful figures across industries. Financial trails routed through a maze of charities, shells, advisory committees. Meeting minutes. Internal notes from Mr. E about influence strategies. References to legislators, diplomats, agency heads. Dozens of unnamed individuals occupying the same ambiguous space as the president. Social networks went berserk. News outlets launched nonstop streams. Committees released statements so quickly they contradicted themselves. Inside the Oval Office, the president watched the chaos unfold. The chief of staff returned with the latest briefing. Sir, public reaction is mixed. Shock, rage, confusion. No single narrative dominating yet. Good, the president said quietly. That buys time. For what? The chief of staff asked. The president looked out the window at the darkening sky. For the country to realize this wasn't a scandal about 2 leaders, he said. It was a blueprint for how power gets compromised, everywhere. The chief of staff hesitated. And your future? The president exhaled slowly. I don't know. 2 days later, the committees issued their first conclusions, not final, not authoritative, but damning enough to shift political gravity. They found widespread negligence across multiple administrations, evidence of influence, networks spanning years. No single mastermind, no singular villain, but systemic rot woven into the foundations of political power. The former president held a press conference implying vindication. The president did not. He simply returned to work. His approval dropped, but not as sharply as predicted. Some of the public admired the transparency. Others blamed him. Others blamed the system itself. The former secretary maintained strategic silence, a silence that spoke volumes. The nation moved forward, bruised, disoriented, newly skeptical, but something had changed. This wasn't the end of a scandal. It was the beginning of an era of scrutiny unlike anything the government had ever faced. And though no one said it aloud, every senior official knew the next archive could come at any moment, and next time, no one would be spared.